Welcome to a special episode of Coffee in the Barn, where we discuss exclusive content featuring our captivating guest speakers. Today, prepare to be enthralled as we dive deep into the minds and hearts of our extraordinary guests. From pioneer figures in the world of agriculture to trailblazers pushing the boundaries of innovation, each speaker brings a unique perspective and a wealth of insight to share. So grab your coffee and settle in to learn more about our incredible guests. Welcome to this week's episode of Coffee in the Barn. We are very fortunate to have with us Emily Krause, Director of Nutrition with the National Pork Board. And welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So Emily, could you just explain to our audience a little bit more about your background and how you got started in your career and how you ended up at the pork board?
Sure, absolutely. So going back all the way to high school, I was a cross-country runner, and thankfully my coach, unlike other coaches of different sports, was really into talking about nutrition and how if you ate well before a race, you performed better than if you maybe have fast food or junk food. And so that got me interested in nutrition and sports nutrition. And so in talking to my parents about that, they said, hey, did you know that there's actually a degree for that? And so I went to school for dietetics for nutrition at the University of Wisconsin Stout. And yeah, go Blue Devils. And really loved my 4 years there. And while the focus was more so on clinical, I did get exposure. We were required to do hours with dietitians in the community. And I actually met a dietitian in a small town that worked for a grocery store. And I thought, this is the coolest thing. I love grocery shopping and I love nutrition, and I can have a job in a grocery store talking about nutrition all day and being by food. This is super cool. And so I really wanted to go down that path. And to become a dietitian, you actually need to do a dietetic internship. And so I moved down to Illinois after that and did a 1-year internship with hospital system down there. Again, got some experience with dietitians that worked for Hy-Vee down in Peoria, Illinois, and absolutely loved that. Came back up to Wisconsin, Minnesota, and got a job with the Midwest-based retailer Coburn's. And so that I was one of the first dietitians that they had ever had, and super cool experience. I started in the store. I was talking with people in the grocery aisles, doing consults, doing cooking demonstrations, presentations, and had a ton of fun getting to talk about everything, actually going to the produce aisle, going to the meat aisle and talking about food right there, and saw that there was a huge value to being able to talk about nutrition and food all at once. I always say that dietitians know about nutrition and not necessarily food. And so in that role, I was able to do both, and I loved it. And then on the side, I decided to get my master's degree because they were requiring it eventually to become a dietitian. And so I got my master's degree in dietetics from Iowa State University online while I worked full time for Coburn's. And that was really fun to be able to take my real life experience and apply it to a lot of the projects that I was doing with my master's degree. And so now to become a dietitian, you actually have to have a master's degree, do your internship before you sit for your exam. And so I spent 7 years with Coburn's. I worked my way up to being able to manage all of our nutrition programs. I had to deal with nutrition. I had a hand in it and was at the corporate level by the time that I left. And actually, while at Coburn still, I was connected with Minnesota Pork. And we were promoting, as a dietitian, we were promoting products throughout the store, but I was connected with the Minnesota Pork team and worked with them on some TV segments where I was talking about pork because I did several TV segments while I was there. We talked about pork on social media, put together recipes, and really had a strong passion for talking about how all foods fit and how flavorful food can be if it's prepared correctly. And I found that while I was talking about pork then, and especially now in my role at National Pork Board. And after connecting with Minnesota Pork, I, followed along with the National Pork Board and saw that there was an opening for the Director of Nutrition, Health and Wellness Initiatives. And I applied, and luckily I got it. So I've been with the Pork Board for just under a year now. I started in April of 2023, and it's been, such a fun experience. I didn't share about anything about ag in my background. I don't have an ag background, but being in the grocery store, we were talking about all different types of foods. I was connected with farmers while I was there because I saw the importance about telling the whole story of food, not just specifically about nutrition or preparation, but where food comes from. And so now in this role at the National Pork Board, I mainly work with our healthcare professional community. So how are we engaging with mainly dietitians right now, like I was at a retail store, and giving them the information and support that they need to not only talk about pork, but be able to feel more confident in talking about nutrition in general to their specific audience. So whether it's a patient in a hospital or a shopper in a grocery store. And so right now with that, I run our dietitian healthcare professional community called Pork and Partners. And that is our healthcare professional community where we have a monthly email, we have an Instagram page, and of course, we're talking about pork nutrition and pork research, but a huge component of that community is supporting healthcare professionals with things that they probably didn't learn in school. So I have no background in my master's or bachelor's degree with media training. And so I had to learn along the way. And we're seeing now that a lot of dietitians are asked really from all areas of practice to go on television, go on radio, go on podcasts like this one, but they don't have any knowledge on how to speak to what they know just on a digital platform. And so we're trying to do media trainings, culinary trainings for these healthcare professionals to help them really tell the nutrition and food story all together.
So was this role that you currently have in working with this Pork and Partners and improving that communication within the healthcare professionals, was that role developed over the last year or so, or how long has that program been going on?
Great question. So we had a dietitian for a long time that was doing all components. So talking with dietitians. I actually went on a farm tour that was done by the Pork Board 7 years ago, I think it was. So they were doing, research, doing that, but it was one person. And then they had another dietitian come in who kind of looked at the strategy and said, we need to revamp this. We need to take another look at what we're doing and really focus in on nutrition. And so we have now 3 pillars. We have research. So we have Dr. Kristen Hicksruth, who oversees our nutrition research. And then we have the consumer side where we're talking about nutrition. And then we have the side that I oversee, which is the healthcare professional. So both Kristen's role in research and my role in endorsement are 2 new roles for the team.
And how has the feedback been from the different healthcare professionals that you guys have been working with and reaching throughout this platform over the last year or so?
It's been super positive. I mean, it's been really interesting because not all dietitians, like I said, know food necessarily. So going to my retail dietitians and talking to them about pork, they didn't know necessarily that there's 8 lean cuts. They didn't know, pork tenderloin is just as lean as boneless, skinless chicken breast and some of those, but they're aware of it for the most part. But when we're talking with maybe our food service or clinical dietitians, when they think of pork, they think of bacon. And so trying to just reframe what their viewpoint of pork is that there's a lot of variation and variety. And so having those conversations, it's pretty positive. We've done several different in-person events, and it's been super fun to have those conversations. One of my favorite stories from a conference I did last fall, I was representing Pork and Partners at a booth, and a dietitian came up and was like, I just don't really like pork. And do you mind if I ask why that is? That's totally okay, but just curious. She's like, I think it's a texture thing. Like, well, okay, can you go back home, grab a pork chop, cook it to 145, let it rest 3 minutes, and then if you still don't like it, totally okay. But I think you've been eating overcooked pork chops your entire life. I don't like a chewy, dry pork chop either. So I think that's totally fair. And so it's been super fun, and we really, with that community, it's a lot different than how we talk to other sectors, that we really emphasize on the partner piece. And so we talk to our community like they're our friends, and we have that really fun, we throw in some puns, we share information that's interesting to them and helpful. My biggest pet peeve as a retail dietitian was getting information from commodity boards, organizations that wasn't specific to what I needed in my role. It was just blanket information. And so what we're doing is trying to target the information that we have and make it really applicable to the different groups that we're talking to. So then they feel more comfortable talking about it because they see the application.
Yeah, that's awesome. I definitely think there's a need for the additional education because, even as an individual going to just a healthcare professional myself or for my kids, I feel like you think that a healthcare professional they kind of need to know a little bit about everything. And, you go to them as a trusted advisor asking different questions. And especially on the nutrition side, I think sometimes there's not enough information. There's a lot of information out there, but what information is actually what do you need to know?
Mm-hmm. And what's trust, what's truth, right? Anyone can go on social media or on the internet and you can find 10 million answers for one thing, and they're all different. And so I completely agree. Dietitians are the number one trusted source of nutrition, but I think a lot of people also can agree that when they're talking with their doctor or their physician, they're talking about nutrition too. And they might not be having those conversations with a registered dietitian. And so, that's kind of the next stage of Pork and Partners is how are we talking to physicians? Because that's a different conversation too. Mm-hmm. It really is important. Of course, we hope that healthcare professionals are doing their due diligence and looking at research and getting their information. But sometimes if it's just not coming across in what they're looking at, they just don't know. And I think, specifically for pork, as the more conversations I'm having, I think it's just the forgotten animal protein. It's not thought of. People don't necessarily think it's good or bad. Sometimes it's just they forget about it. And so that's what we're trying to do is try to have those conversations to get it seat at the table, pun intended, to be able to have people know that it is an option and they can feel comfortable eating it and serving it to their family.
Have you seen an increase in the way that pork is served and offered within the hospital setting as you've continued on this Pork and Partners journey?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Morgan. And I think it's honestly two separate things. It's one, talking to the dietitian, but there's not always a dietitian within the food service portion. And so I think that's absolutely an opportunity too. There's so many different angles on how food is talked about, but yeah, the food service portion of the hospital, that's an opportunity. Same thing goes for, universities and school food service. And there's a ton of different sectors for that. So no, I haven't, but I also haven't really been connected in with the food service side as of now.
Looking back on your retail experience as a dietitian, were you working more in rural grocery store environments or urban city grocery stores?
Great question. So I would say a little bit of a mix. Not a major city, but if you're familiar with Minnesota, St. Cloud, Minnesota, central Minnesota is where the retailer was based out of. So they serve the St. Cloud area, lots of stores up in there. But again, a lot of rural. Again, if you're familiar with Minnesota, we weren't really in the Twin Cities. So we weren't in urban Twin Cities. It was St. Cloud and then more rural. And so that's really, truly why we had made the switch from going from working on one-on-one with shoppers and giving presentations in store, is that we saw a greater need to share this message. And truly, the pandemic was the tipping point of we couldn't be in person. No one was coming to the grocery store to see a dietitian. I can tell you that. They were trying not to come to the grocery store, period. And so we were trying to figure out a way of how can we still share this message. And so we did that through digital platforms, through e-commerce, through social media, and saw a lot greater reach. And because they were so rural and stores were hours apart, it really made it hard to be able to be everywhere in person. And so we found that switch was beneficial, and we had a larger reach.
The only reason I asked that question is because I was wondering if you saw different feedback and different viewpoints from the different, I guess, if you were specifically informing the consumer about different meat products. Mm-hmm. What was the response, I guess, on the rural grocery store side, consumer versus the larger city consumer?
Totally. And I'm laughing and smiling to myself because I can think of one time in particular that it was early on when I first started. I did a lot of sampling when I first started and getting people to try maybe new products or new recipes. And I was in one of our rural stores or more rural stores. And there was this new turkey meatball that had just come out. And it was low sodium. So as a dietitian, I'm like, this is fantastic. It's, in the freezer aisle. You can just throw it in the microwave or put it on the stove and you're good to go in 10 minutes or whatever it was. Threw on some barbecue sauce, and I'm doing samplings, and people are coming through and they're asking what it is. And I'm like, oh, it's a turkey meatball. And they look at me like, what do you mean a turkey meat? And this is not like 20 years ago. This was probably 8 years ago. And what are you talking about, a turkey meatball? Why would you use turkey in a meatball? And so, if they were so, focused on like meatball is beef.
Right.
And that's how it is. And so I think once I understood that when you're talking to different audiences, and granted I was a naive dietitian, that like everyone wants health information and everyone wants to be, eat healthy. And I learned that quickly it wasn't the case, and you really had to meet people where they were at and understand what their preferences were and help them, add certain things or mix things up to make it more healthful. So absolutely. I think they were definitely more receptive to eating meat for sure. I mean, Midwest, rural Minnesota, they definitely loved our meat. So it wasn't a hard sell. I think it was more so talking about leaner cuts of meat and then talking about, produce and getting more produce along with their meat. That was where it was a little bit more tough.
When you were in Illinois, were you in a hospital setting or a retail setting as well?
Both. So I spent a year in Illinois and through my internship, and I probably over that period of time, I spent about 7-8 months in the hospital setting, and then the rest in a food service or retail setting. And by far, I loved the retail setting. I mean, we had so much fun. It was a more populous area, so there was multiple Hy-Vees grocery stores, and they had multiple dietitians. And so we were doing classes, we were doing wine and food pairings. So I had a lot of fun with that and really enjoyed just the aspect of talking to people and meeting them where they're at. Like I said before, there's something so different about having food, talking to someone about nutrition and being able to walk them over to a product or show them how to make it in a store where they're purchasing it versus being in the hospital setting and giving them information and they don't want to talk to you. They just want to get out of the hospital. And I don't blame them. And that was never really, I always joke with my friends, that hospital setting was never for me. I definitely always had a passion for working out in the community and working with people that were open, or, where you had that in to talk to them about nutrition. And so that was a great experience. But I mean, the clinical portion was important too, and learning how to deal with various people that don't want to talk to you. That helps you learn. It was a great learning experience. Now, I got yelled at a few times to get out of people's rooms, but you learn, I think that was really important, to learning how to approach different types of people going into the grocery setting, when you just go up to random people and ask them if they need help finding anything, and ask them questions about the food that they're eating. Because you get denied.
Oh, I mean, I know there's some people in the grocery store that are just, in to get their 2 or 3 things and get out, and they don't want to sit and dilly-dally.
Yeah. And like I said, I was a naive dietitian going into it, thinking everyone wanted to talk to the dietitian. And so you kind of learned how to read people from afar and see if they were willing to have a conversation.
Is it still common today for larger grocery store chains to have dietitians in the store? Because I can say, for me personally, I've never ran into a dietitian within the grocery store. I don't know, it's just because I shop at the local Piggly Wiggly.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a good question too, because in the Twin Cities where I was before moving to Oklahoma here, there was a lot of Hy-Vees. We had a couple smaller regional, like Coburn's, and another regional grocery store that all had dietitians. You go out to the East Coast, there are a ton of retailers that have dietitians. Texas, H-E-B, United, they have dietitians. So I think it's really a regional thing. There are like Kroger's have dietitians, but they're not always in store. And so I shouldn't put a number on it, but I think there's probably maybe around 1,000, maybe a little bit more, retail dietitians across the U.S. So there are quite a few. I think they're in pockets throughout the U.S.
And there's a lot more grocery stores than dietitians for them to reach.
Oh, absolutely. Exactly. So it's a huge benefit when dietitians are in there, but a lot of dietitians also work at the corporate office doing regulatory, working on nutrition labels, or working on broad nutrition programs. And so it really just depends. I don't know Piggly Wiggly off the top of my head. I've never met one from Piggly Wiggly.
It's a very Wisconsin.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of it, and I think it's such a fun name.
Well, their slogan is Piggly Wiggly, shop the pig.
Hey, that is perfect. Talking about pork.
No.
Yeah, they need a dietitian. We need to get one in there.
Well, I try to inform anyone when I'm at the store if there's a sale on pork loin or ribs or whatever. I'll make sure to spread the nutritional news about pork.
Dietitian really can help you with this. Yeah. Getting the word out there.
As you've transitioned from the retail hospital setting side to now working with the National Pork Board, has there been anything that surprised you about the pork industry and how we market pork?
That's a good question. So what's funny is that, I worked with Minnesota Pork. I was talking about it all the time, but then I came to the pork board. I'm like, there are so many things I did not know. And luckily I have been able to go on a farm like I said, 7 years ago. And so I was able to see that side of it. I think showering in, showering out, like that was so interesting. And I probably would have had no idea unless I would have gone on that tour. But what has been my favorite part, everyone has just been wonderful. And I feel like it's such a small world. I think everyone knows each other within the industry. And so it's been really fun. I mean, I attended World Pork Expo for the first time last year, and everyone knows each other. And so it's really fantastic, not having backgrounds, I was afraid asking questions like they would just sound stupid because it's such common knowledge for people that grew up on a farm or grew up in the industry. And so being able to ask all those stupid and silly questions, which everyone says there's no such thing, but when you're surrounded by people that think it's such common knowledge, it's been really wonderful. And again, like, I'm biased, but I think there's such a need to be able to share this with retail dietitians because they can really help tell this story. And, it's sometimes siloed, but it shouldn't be. I mean, talking,
right.
I came from a smaller retailer, so it's a lot easier, but talking with their merchandising team, talking with their marketing team to understand it to some degree too, so they can better tell the story. I mean, we did some segments with pig farmers and me. And so you're really able to tell the story. And I think there's such a important story to tell. I mean, every farmer I've ever met is so passionate about what they do. And I think people they miss that. They don't, it's all about the nutrition or how it's raised, but the farmer's not usually in that conversation. And so I think that's a huge story to tell. And I think it can more easily, again, I'm biased, but be told through the nutrition story and telling those stories together.
Do the other protein sectors also have dietitians working within their national organizations as well?
They do. So not all of them. I know beef, they have like 6 dietitians at national and about 14 outside, like on the state level. And then dairy has 20 at national, and I think they have 100 total. So there are a lot of dietitians being able to tell that story. And so what we're doing is really talking with we have a group of early adopter states is what we call them, that have raised their hands, said they're interested in talking about nutrition. And I'm working with them to find dietitians locally that can help them share that message and work with them that know their communities. And that's been fun. I mean, I get super excited about that because it's just helping share that message and giving it to people that are local. Because it's one thing for me to say it, at national, but I'm living in Oklahoma. So if I'm talking to someone in California or Texas, it's different than a dietitian from Texas or from Oklahoma saying, hey, down the road, this person XYZ making those connections. Well, I met this farmer and boy, let me tell you XYZ. I don't know. I think there's just that personal touch there. And so really trying to make that happen by making those connections throughout the U.S.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. Well, I really appreciate you giving us a little bit more insight on the Pork and Partners community network that you guys are building off of within the National Pork Board and trying to expand that knowledge within the healthcare professional systems as well as, at a national and regional level. Thank you very much.
Thank you.